What is it that people are seeing? Is it a man? An animal? A myth? Or something else? Are they delusional? Are they lying? Some are pastors. Some are law enforcement. Some are military. If they are delusional liars, why do we trust them to lead us to God? To put people in jail and to protect our way of life? Why are their words and actions good enough for that? But when it comes to experiencing something out of the ordinary, something fascinating, something possibly terrifying, they become a fool, a joke, an idiot. Not here. We are the Big Dog T2B. Welcome to the show. Hello everyone, my name is Jack, and welcome to the Big Dog T2B. For tonight's show, we have something a little different. During recent travel, I had the opportunity to stop in Huntsville, Alabama, and see some friends. Nate and I decided to meet with some of the guys from the Bankhead outing and discuss the trip. The show was for friends. We were all in the same room with each other and talk over each other as we laugh and carry on. And the language in the show is not suitable for children. F-bombs are present, but we will squelch them to some degree. Other profanity will be left as is. The acoustics of this show are not the quality of those in previous shows. The location for this show is in the home of one of the group. The home is virtually empty because he is in the process of moving. We have added noise removal, audio leveling, and boosted the audio in an attempt to make the quality of the show the best we can. Video from the trip is interspaced throughout the show. The upcoming audio will be loud compared to this audio. Please turn your volume down now and adjust up as the discussion begins. Thank you for your patience and understanding, and we hope you enjoy the show. Hello everyone, my name is Jack, and welcome to the Big Dog T2B. As usual, we have the founder of the Big Dog T2B with us, Nathan Bowman. How you doing, Nate?
I'm good, Nick. How about you?
Not bad. So tonight, after several requests, we're going to do the Bankhead story. And as special guests with us tonight, we have two people that were with us on the Bankhead trip. One is Adam. How you doing, Adam?
Doing well.
And Ivan.
What's up, Jack?
So, Adam, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Former military. Enjoy being outside, hiking, camping, doing all that kind of stuff.
Standard thing.
Yeah.
How about you, Ivan? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a contractor. Adam and I and Joe, who's unfortunately not with us tonight, love to do a bunch of stuff outdoors. And pretty much our motto is, if it doesn't suck, we don't do it.
I have used that on other shows. And I think the term is embrace the suck.
Yeah, we find ourselves in that category quite often.
Yeah.
Brutal trips.
Absolutely. So, Joe and I had been looking at this one place in Bankhead National Forest, and it's back in there around Haygood Creek, and we looked at several ways to get back in there, and it is not an easy place to get to, and it's kind of a little bit of a geographical anomaly where we actually wanted to camp that night. And unfortunately, because I didn't know how long it was going to take to download those maps into our GPS, we got a late start that day. And we didn't get back to where we actually wanted to go. Ivan, can you tell us a little bit about the terrain and where we actually went, how far we were from the nearest paved road, how far from the nearest house?
Wow, I think the nearest house was, it seems like about 6 or 7 miles from when we left the beaten path. Been in Bankhead quite often, and there's a lot of dirt roads that, you know, lead to whatever you can call a trailhead. A lot of times we're bushwhacking through it. you Jack, you had coordinates set in for, a place I hadn't been in. Oh, I think it was a old fire road that we were walking down off of where we put in, which was, we probably went in a few miles. Pretty much easy grade, walking a ridge line. And then we just dumped off into the bottom. where I sat there and told Adam at one point, does Jack know that the little squiggly lines on his GPS, when they get closer together, and with the elevations changing rapidly?
Absolutely. So, Adam, what did you think about our descent into Haygood Creek?
It was steep. It was real steep. That's about the only way I could really describe it. It was pretty damn steep. It covered with leaves and stuff, and then there was, I think everybody probably took a spill at some point.
Yeah.
Heading down the hill. But it was not where most people would be venturing off to.
Not the first choice.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've talked about on other shows, and Nate has too, me personally, I saw one piece of trash in there, and I think it was a glass orange crush bottle with the styrofoam insulation cover around it. And that was the one piece of trash. To be in there to the point to where you're not seeing any trash, particularly being on a creek that's flowing, that there's no trash washed up there. And to be that far in, you can say that we had gone someplace where people normally don't go.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Nobody goes back there.
Right.
It's definitely not a frequented site.
People are not naturally that ambitious.
Yeah, not so much.
And me personally, I can say I was overly ambitious because we got down in the bottom end of Haygood Creek. We got to where we had good running water. Got to where we had good flat ground to make a camp. And the question was whether or not we were going to cross Haygood Creek and come up that equal bluff on the other side. Now, we stopped in traversing 2-3 miles, maybe, getting back in there. And I was running about 80 pounds on my back. Nate had about the same, Joe had about the same, you had about the same.
We
And
were
then there's Adam. And if people can't see us because we're not on video. Adam is not a big dude.
But he's a strong.
Woo! Man. And Adam had a pack that was about 1.5 to 2 times the size of everybody else.
And way better than ours. He had a kefir.
Exactly.
Well, I packed in like steaks, potatoes.
Exactly.
We ate real good. Yeah.
We ate good. And it's because of Adam. Adam has this pack that's literally every bit as big as he is. And he's trekking in there, and he's keeping up with everybody. He's doing that thing. When we start going downhill, and we're basically moving from tree to tree so that we can try to keep some footing without gravity taking over and forcing us to the bottom of the hill in a hurry.
It would have been a slip and slide.
Okay. So we get in there the first night, and another bit of background is everybody here knows that I won't say that I'm a believer. That I have problems with that. Nate is a knower. Nate has had this thing, he's had close physical proximity to him. And that's a part of his life, it's a part of who he is. Adam, when Joe reached out to Adam, my oldest son, and Joe told him where we were going, I think he told me that Adam's question is, he said, ghost or Bigfoot? And Joe said, Bigfoot. And Adam said, I'm in. But Adam is not a believer really that I'm aware of either. Now on the farther end of the spectrum, there's Ivan. Ivan's my brother and I love him. He's a great guy. I know if I call him Ivan's going to be. Ivan is very, very, very much a Bigfoot denier. And it's just a fact of who he was. And as we're moving in there, Ivan's having a lot of fun with me ragging us. He's having a lot of fun with Nate. And we start ragging on each other. And started ragging back, and I think I stopped just short of Ivan actually hitting.
Well, to be fair, you know, I mean, to be fair, I will still always listen to what
Absolutely.
anybody has to say. And whether I believe it or not, you are due your fair speech and giving me the facts that you have. I'm not saying that you're not right. Me personally, I don't feel it. And I want to make it clear. We joke around with each other because we're friends.
Right.
However, on what you're saying, and I understand the seriousness in what you're saying to me, I am not belittling that, not one bit. Because what somebody has seen that I have not seen that I can't speak to, there's no mockery of anything, aside from you not just poking fun with each other.
But
you
just
know?
having a good time.
Yeah,
You know, but you know, and we have always been there. It was a part of the brief before we went in there,
Yeah,
right? Bring a little alcohol.
well, that's standard.
Exactly. Maintain functionality. Everyone here has been the recipient of an award-winning ass whooping. And it can happen again. And we're those kinds of friends. Right? And that's what we did. We set up camp. We had a long day of getting in there, and it was tough. It wasn't tough, you know, in the way that you say average person says this is tough. We're experienced guys. We've done the thing. Getting in there
That was the easy part.
that was the easy part, but even getting in there was no small chore.
Oh, no.
Most people wouldn't have.
The fall
Yeah.
factor.
No.
If, to Ivan's defense, had I not seen the things that I've seen, I would be the exact same. You could not convince me that, hey, these things exist. I'd be like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. Till you see one standing right in the middle of the road looking at you swaying back and forth. The way you need to go. Well, I do that. But, you know, when we went to Bankhead, I weighed 310 pounds. I don't now. I'm considerably lighter. Just weigh about 270 now. But the whole way down that hill, I'm thinking, how in the world am I ever going to get my big ass back out of here? Because ain't nobody told my back. When I stroke out coming up this hill, just call somebody, tell them what happened to me.
There was no calling anybody, Nate.
I mean-
We were so far back there, we just gonna have to put some posies on you.
Yeah.
They couldn't have gotten, you could not get a helo in there.
You probably didn't. Yeah, you get dropped.
They would have had to drop a basket
Yeah.
from over 150 feet.
Easy.
Yeah, because all old growth.
Yep, that was all old growth forest. Adam, how long do you think it took us to get in?
Probably over an hour. I'd say.
Over an hour.
Yeah.
Do you know how long it took us to get out?
Probably 3.
Close to 3 hours.
Yeah.
You think 3?
At least 2.5.
Well, Joe blew his back out on the way down.
Mm-hmm.
So he was having problems. I know that,
I've been sitting at a desk for 7
yeah,
years.
Adam and I pumped it out of there and made the decision at the top to sit there and drop our packs and go back down to make sure that everybody was, because
Yep.
when you're smoked, you're smoked.
Yep.
And there was a place that we crossed over, and I remember being at that cliff and telling everyone where to put their feet, because
Yep.
Nate actually got off balance, and I was like, "Oh shit! If you fall there,
I thought Nate was done for you.
500 feet.
you're dead."
Yeah.
You would not stop.
You're dead.
You
So
would
I
not
remember-
stop for 500 feet.
I remember coming down there.
Unless you hung on a tree.
Yeah. And Joe didn't want any help, but he was taking it easy. Nate was the next one up. I remember Jack coming down.
Yep. And I looked at you, you said, you want me to take your pack? I think the exact words were, fuck you.
Yeah.
I brought my stuff in here. I brought my stuff in here. I'm packing my own stuff out.
Right. And so Adam had Joe, and Nate's big beast of himself pumped himself out there on his own, except for that one little skip that I thought, oh shit.
Yeah, it was long way to the bottom. Long way to the bottom.
And that was where you literally couldn't move 2 feet without a tree. On the edge of that cliff and the rock outcroppings with it, there were things growing out of the rocks.
Yeah.
Myself, Nate, and Joe, we had stopped at the bottom end of that ledge, and at the top of that ledge is where it flattened out. This was the last little bit we had to basically mini switchback back and forth across that rock face to get
It was gnarly.
80, 100 pounds of gear out of there.
Yeah.
And that was just brutal.
Probably 150 feet to travel 10 feet up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, basically.
Yep.
That little piece was legit.
Hey, if I had I not been as strong as I am, I couldn't come out. I mean, that's the only way.
When they came up side of the hill, if his face didn't look like Santa Claus's jacket, but you know what? He still pumped it out. And
Yeah.
He wasn't stopping.
Yep.
At first I thought I wouldn't start back. But it is what it is.
But, so that's the terrain getting in and
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
So we get in, and this is my memory. Everybody's perception is a little bit different.
Let
Go
me,
ahead,
let me footnote with something else. When we finally got to the end of the trail, we made it back to the road. We had to walk about 100 yards down the road with the truck. And I said, Nate, what are you doing? He goes, I ain't carrying this fucking back another 10 feet.
Yeah. You gonna drive the truck up here and get it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, laugh so hard.
So the first night that we got in there, perceptions are different,
Right.
right? We got in there, and we had enough to have a couple shots each night that we were in there. We didn't have enough alcohol with us really to incapacitate us, even if we decided to consume it all at one time.
No.
Right?
That
We-
sucks.
Yeah, it does. And then there's no. But we get in there in that first night, and I'm paying attention across the creek and up that bluff where I wanted us to go. I don't know, based upon that trip, if that spot is accessible from that side of the creek, because we decided to take the short cycle in from the east side of Haygood Creek down that old logging road, and then we said, okay, coming back up, it's a really short thing, but it's really steep, we ought to be able to do that. And I was the one that said it before we started the descent. Okay, we get to the bottom, we're going back up to this, up the other side, and I said, we get to the bottom, we're making camp, I'm not going any farther tonight. So we get down and we make camp. And one of the things that was odd about the trek in there, one of the things that was odd about the trek out, one of the things that was odd about our time there is me personally. I did not see a bird. I did not see a squirrel.
Fair.
I did not see a raccoon.
Did not see any.
I did
was
not
a distinct
see a
lack of wildlife, yeah.
hawk. I did not see a
Not
pig.
another living thing but us.
I did not see a pig. Now, we did see hog sign. Me and Adam went down to the creek to get water, and we saw hog sign, scrubs on trees and tracks, and to get back into the whole genre of the show, something that me and Adam didn't say anything about really when we got back to camp, Adam and I did see some relatively suspicious tracks. Do you remember that?
I do not.
You do not. Because you stepped, and when you stepped, it was to the point that it caught your ball sack because the stride was too big.
Okay, yeah.
You remember?
Yeah, I do remember. Yeah. Yeah, because I remember stretching it out, and I was like, what the fuck is this? Yeah.
Exactly. Now, it wasn't a kind of track where you could see toes, but you did
They were
see,
older.
yep,
Yeah.
you did see a Fred Flintstone block square thing mash out in the mud. And this is mud that had been rooted up by hogs. It had been mud, it was mud that had been stomped through by hogs. We all know what, pine wood rooters do. But in the middle of this, I looked down and I said, huh. And Adam came up and he's looking down the length of the track. And Adam said, what the hell is that? And he stuck his foot beside it. And I went from there and I started looking. And Adam went, no, with his super stride with his left foot out in front of him and went lop back into the mud. And I don't stretch as much as Adam does. I can tell you right now, my body doesn't make that motion. Adam's left foot hit the ground, and lo and behold, while he's doing a version of the split, there's another mark, just like the first one, on Adam's stride. Adam is a spry guy. He's lean, but he's not small. And I can tell you that would have been, for Adam to be a super stride, single stride, that would have been an easy 1.5.
At a flat out sprint.
Of
Yeah.
even on a run,
Yeah.
on a dead run.
Stretching out as far as you could, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
You would have had to been on purpose gazelle type running to make that mark.
I would have had been like jumping.
Yep. On purpose.
Yeah.
Right, not a run, not trying to make ground.
No.
But just doing something calm.
Yeah.
We get in there the first night and we make camp. We had a couple shots and, you know, we're having a good time and we're trying to shake off basically the road rash from getting in there. And over there across the creek, I heard not a coyote howl, but it set off the coyotes. I heard this, oh, and then the coyotes lit off. And they shut down. And about 20, 30 minutes later, I heard this, and then I heard, from a little bit farther away, and all the coyotes lit off. And then, me listening to it, and it's a perception thing, and maybe you don't, maybe that didn't strike a nerve with you guys. But for all the world, to me, it sounded like 2 or more of those coyotes died. They squalled. It wasn't the, coyotes calling into a feed. It wasn't a coyote lost call. It wasn't a pup lost call. It sounded like pain. And I heard a couple of what sounded like coyote pain calls in there. And then they all shut down. And that was the first night we were in there. Do you guys remember anything like that?
I remember coyotes.
I remember coyotes as well.
Yeah.
The first night?
Yeah.
They were a ways off though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't recall if I heard anything sound like they stopped, but
And they stopped abruptly.
yeah, but I've been in the woods before where that's happened as well.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, coyotes do their coyote thing.
Who are we to ponder what dawns on the mind of a coyote? Like I said, I remember hearing this, and it did sound like a coyote to me, and they lit off, and then I heard, and then I heard a more higher pitch, and it continued for a second. The coyotes lit off, and then it sounded like violence.
I remember that. And to me, that's the perception that I've got. And then, maybe in my mind, I want to say before they shut down, there was a separation between the majority of the coyotes and the ones that were in distress. Maybe like the pack as a whole was moving away, but it's the way I perceived what I was hearing.
Well, they'll call each other. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's why you have
Oh, it's communication.
a distress call. You'll find somebody comes because number one, they'll eat their own. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
they'll cannibalize themselves.
Yeah.
Whatever. So it might have been I hear that my buddies are in trouble, and now that's
A meal.
an opportunity to eat something.
And I've got the other pack that I have in the Jeep. I've got 3 different coyote diaphragm calls in there that I play around with, and I mess with coyotes where I can.
Right.
But that was odd to me,
Right.
right? The cadence, the circumstances, all those kinds of things. That was the only real thing that happened that night,
Yeah.
because the way I remember it, I was sitting because downhill, Haygood Creek, that was west. The road, the way out, back behind us, was east. We built the fire, and we never had a real big fire.
The temperature was, did it get down to 18 that night?
Yep.
It was about 18 degrees that night. It was cold, but still a little fire.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, that's one of the reasons for the wait. We were geared out for teen temperatures.
if it doesn't suck, we don't do it.
So I'm looking across the fire. I'm to the east. You're to the west.
Yep.
Nate was to the south. And we're sitting there having a good time with each other, ragging on each other, doing that kind of thing.
I forget what we were talking about, Jack, but we were in some quantum physics shit.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that was like,
Deep
we're
ass
going to stop all this stuff.
Exactly.
Way too serious.
I digress, go ahead.
Making my brain melt. So, and all of that stuff happened, and that was kind of the first night. And that first day when we were setting up camp, another one of those things, Nate, we're all hammock campers. Like me, Ivan, Adam, Joe, we're hammock campers by that thing. Nate, moving in there with us, Nate had never been a hammock camper up until that point. So Nate gets over and he's stringing up his hammock and all that other kind of stuff, and Nate's a big old boy getting out of it, in and out of the hammock. Even if you're Adam, that ain't that easy. It requires a little bit of talent, a little bit of experience. So Nate had strung his hammock up. Don't know if you guys remember this. About the last I can tell you do.
Yep.
Nate had strung his hammock up. It probably wasn't the best knots in the world. And I went over and Nate's like, I can't get in this damn thing. So I went over and I got in Nate's hammock and I bundled up and I crossed my arms and I crossed my legs and I was about 4 feet off the ground. What happened next?
On the ground.
Now, I'm about 230 pounds.
Fair.
Fair.
Yep.
And I hit the ground for about 4 feet. So we make that night, we make camp, we have a good time because Adam was so hospitable and decided to hike in about 150 pounds worth of gear and food. We ate really well that night.
Except me, because I couldn't eat any of the.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, so, as a matter of fact, my Mountain House self freeze dried food introduced Nate to the Mountain House, was it the beef stroganoff or
Beef
the chili
stroganoff.
mac?
Yeah.
Nick going, oh my God, I can't believe it's this good.
Don't know if you guys noticed, every night we were there, I stayed up the bulk of the night. I was up and standing by the fire
You're on more of a mission than I am.
just about all night long.
Yeah.
Right. We make camp that night. I'm standing by the fire, kicking stuff in the fire. Nate would wake up. I talk to Nate for a few minutes. Adam would wake up. I talk to Adam for a few minutes. Same way with you.
Yeah.
Same way with Joe. Not too long before daylight, I went and turned in, and Nate and I went out that next day. We went north on Haygood Creek for about 1.5 miles or so,
I remember that.
trying to make it across the creek to where we wanted to go. We camped the first night. It was inaccessible, at least for what we could do. And we come back, and Nate and Adam were on one side of the fire. They were on the north side of the fire. You were uphill, should be to the east. I was downhill toward the west, and I had my back to the fire. And Nate, you know, God bless him, he spent way too much money on stuff to do just this and nothing else. He's got a couple thermals.
Yep.
Him and Adam are over there between my hammock and his hammock,
Playing with thermals.
playing with
Yep,
the
I remember
thermals.
that. Yep.
And you're looking uphill, and I can hear the two of them. What's that? I don't know. That's moving, isn't it? Yeah, I think so. Wait a minute. What's that over there? And as I'm sitting here and I've got my back to the fire, and Joe's milling around, doing the Joe thing. Out of the corner of my left eye, and you said it, we were in the teens at night. Over to my left, I catch this sparkle about, I don't know, 50 or 70 yards out. I catch this sparkle. And I looked, and the first thing that flashed in my mind was, oh, must be a firefly over there. And then it kind of hit me. It's way too damn cold for a firefly.
Yeah.
So I called Joe over, and Nate and Adam, you know, they're having a good time, and they're looking through the thermal, and they're seeing stuff, and it doesn't make any sense. And you know, and they're talking. And I called Joe over, and I got him on our right side. And I said, look across my shoulders like a barrel of a gun, and look out there in the woods and tell me what you see. And he came around, he kind of looked like this. He looked down my shoulder and said, eye shine. I said, yeah, I thought so too. I said, do me a favor, go over there and talk to Nate, he's got that thermal. Grab that thermal and come over here and do the same thing. Don't be real conspicuous about it. But just kind of do the same thing and see if you see anything on the thermal. Joe, his description of it is kind of the same as mine. He said, something was peeking out from behind a tree, whatever it was, you know, win, lose, or draw. Because neither one of us says, oh, Bigfoot right there. Neither one of us say that. But he said it was basically the shape of a football and the size of a basketball. And he looked at it, he's looking down my shoulders like this. I said, well, hand me the thermal and let's just kind of shuffle around and you take a look. And I looked at it, and here's this tree. We knew the terrain. We'd been in there, this was our second day. And there's this tree out there, and around this tree, you know, you look at this tree like this, we're basically seeing this thing that does this. You know, it leans out, you can see a definite kind of head shape. And it does this, and then it pops back behind the tree. And Joe and I looked at that, earlier she was here, but Joe and I looked at that until the point where it really got boring. Adam and Nate were looking through the other thermal and looking at that stuff. And what did you think of the thermal you were looking at, Adam?
There were definitely some heat signatures out there. What they were, I have no idea. They were, I don't know, probably 6 or so feet off the ground. Generally around a tree.
And it's really hard to judge, right? The thermals we have are not $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 range thermal imagers, right? They're thermal imagers that are less than $1,000, and they will let you do certain things, but not others. Maybe if we had the $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 thermal out there, maybe we would have been able to make a lot more sense of what we were seeing. But it had your attention.
Yeah.
You know, I remember you and Nate sitting kind of like this, you know, shifting thermal back and forth, and looking at the thing, and me telling Joe, hey, why don't you go see if they got that other thermal? And Ivan, God bless him, Ivan's my brother, I love it. But Ivan's probably, and he's got this kind of look on his face of not really disgust, but these sons have lost their mind. I don't know what the hell they're talking about. He's kind of milling around. So I think it got to the point where we all kind of got bored with the thermal thing.
We ended up putting them down and going on something else. Yeah.
Put them down and go on something else. And at this point, I turned and I am now looking to the north. Ivan, because we'd already had supper, by this time I think we were probably getting well into midnight. All right, it was late. It was not early.
It was late. Yeah. Yeah. So then we get the tree crash.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is where were we at in time of the evening?
I don't know because it's so hard to tell, you know. Because I mean, every time you go into the woods, you know, by the time it gets dark, especially in the wintertime, it's 5 o'clock, and it feels like it's, you know, it feels like it's midnight. I think that it was somewhere around 10 o'clock.
Okay, fair. So we look at my thing that says we're around midnight. We look at your thing that says around 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
And we'll say somewhere between 10 o'clock and midnight, right?
Yeah, fair.
Now we're out in Bankhead National Forest.
Nowheresville.
Nowhere's
Right in the middle of not much.
right? Now, Adam, Joe, myself, we're military veterans. You spend a significant amount of time around military people. And we speak that way.
Yeah.
And we have been talking this way for now basically the last 2 days.
Yep.
We're all obviously armed and significantly armed. There's Nate, the gigantor of the crowd. Loud, boisterous, doing that thing.
With a 6-shooter.
Yeah.
And while sitting against a tree like damn Shrek over there.
So,
Nate's on the ground, we got two
what are
bags.
the chances of, now you guys have a decent sense of the people that live around Bankhead. What do you think the chances are that anybody would think that it was a good idea to walk up on us at night?
That's bad.
You don't do that here in the woods.
That's
No.
bad.
You do not walk up on people.
No.
You don't know what you're walking
You're
up on.
an yourself.
Yeah.
And we were there.
I'll bring that point. I'm going to bring that point up later in the story.
Okay.
For reasons. But
Fair enough.
Continue.
Fair enough. Right? So even the bumpkin of bumpkins would not think that it would be a good idea to walk up on us in the middle of the night, whether it was what Adam was seeing, Adam and Nate through their thermal, me and Joe, what we were seeing through that thermal. But it was about 45 minutes to an hour after we had put the thermals down, the way that I remember it, right? Because nobody's taking notes. And I remember there, and I was standing to the south side of the fire and facing to the north, and Nate was over by his hammock, which was basically to my 10 o'clock. Adam was somewhere around my 1 o'clock, even though his tent was somewhere around my 7 to 8 o'clock. Ivan, you were to my 2:30, 3 o'clock, because you were close. We were within about 5 feet of each other.
Right.
We were both on the fire.
Yeah.
And Joe was direct off of my 3 o'clock. He was at his hammock.
Right.
Yep. And that's the point where I call it the fat kid belly flop. We're all sitting there, and it was a big, loud, soft, long, it wasn't a crisp, it wasn't that.
No.
It was more
It was a dull thud.
like, yep, it was long.
It was a thud. It was a thud with no crack.
Yeah, it was a long,
Top of that hill.
it was deep. There were no limb snapping. There was no tree popping. There were no vines being snapped out of the tree.
Top of
It
that
sounded
hill.
like a dead log that fell over.
It could. And my thing was, when I thought of it, was that either a log or a great big stone had hit Haygood Creek. There are places in there I've got.
I can hear a splash.
Me, and that's what bothered me. There were places in Haygood Creek that I could cross. I got longer boots that I could cross without getting my feet wet.
And
But there were places in Haygood Creek when it made a bend that you might see 4, 5, 6 feet deep. And I was thinking initially in the shock of it, because it was a shocking thing. Can we all agree on that?
Mm-hmm.
That was a lot of nice.
It was loud,
Startling would be the word.
startling. And initially I thought something had hit the water because it was that soft, flat, pliable, slapping log. Right? If you ever heard a real big fat person, it sounded like what they did when they hit the water, but the water never came down.
right, and I'll say this too. and everybody that's ever been in the woods before knows that sound carries for a long way.
And I'm gonna bring that one.
And you can think that it was happening right next to you, and it could be a long way off. And physically, the next day when we walked out of there, I was actually looking for
A tree.
something that fell down
Because we left in that direction.
because I didn't see it, but I didn't see a rock that was out of place.
Yep.
And I looked for traces of like a rock trail. If it had rolled down the mountain or something like that, and jumped off of something and hit.
Absolutely.
So everything was still in place.
Mhm.
It was like.
Here's the reason that I brought up me falling in the hammock.
The thud?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now,
We've done that on another day, Jack.
okay.
It
But
was
here's,
me that time.
yeah, I know. But here's the question. That was me within 10
That's high
feet
enough,
of you
doesn't it?
Yeah.
at 200, 230 pounds,
Hammock
falling
tree?
from 4 feet and hitting the
I
ground.
think we're gonna have.
Compare that to that noise that night. Was there any comparison whatsoever?
No.
But let me add to that too.
Okay.
Because during the daytime, whether you realize it or not, there's a lot of other ambient noise that's going on. Whether you're in the middle of nowhere at all. But at nighttime, when it is dead silent, everything, even the little critters have gone to sleep. There it is dead silence.
But we agreed that there were no critters there whatsoever.
Correct, but what I'm
The
saying
only
is-
sound was the creek noises that was the same whether or not it was daylight or dark.
Actually, Joe shot at a squirrel with his slingshot. Isn't that right, Adam?
Squirrel nest.
Squirrel nest. Oh,
Squirrel
I
nest. That was
stand
squirrel
corrected.
nest. It
We
wasn't
don't know
actually
for a fact
squirrel
there's a
nest.
squirrel in it.
I stand corrected.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, no, it was definitely
But-
a different
right,
noise.
yeah.
Like
Yeah,
it
it
was
was
a
a
much
different-
bigger.
yeah.
Whatever that noise was, it
It's-
was more mass than you.
Yeah, to me it sounded like a log.
Yeah. Sound like a tree
And
falling.
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
estimation, I'll give you my estimation first, not to contaminate, but to lend argument. My estimation on the distance of that noise was within 80 yards. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I would have said 50 to 100.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there.
I would
80
go
yards
with,
ish.
yeah, I would go with 50 to 100, yeah.
I tell you what the sound reminded me of, and it wasn't the same sound, so you may get what I'm fixing to say or what I'm not. An automobile accident. Two cars when they hit. The way they don't bounce, that's the only sound. The two cars. That wasn't the same sound, but the reverberation,
There's no reverberation after.
right, there's nothing after or nothing before, it just boom.
Yep.
Anytime anything happens, Nate, another brother, I love it. Nate will go, yep, that's probably Bigfoot. Me, the first thing I do is I try to come up with anything and everything that it could have possibly been to say no,
But
that is a thing.
and that's when you get Nate out there whacking the side of a tree.
Yeah. We made some tree lights while we were out here.
Yep.
But when I look at that, and like when you were saying, you came out and you were looking for fresh deadfall. You were looking for rocks that had been, moved, made its way down a hill, become dislodged, that thing. And
Because I have to find out what happened that night, and so on the way out, from in the direction that the sound came from, I'm going to be looking for something to make sense of that.
out of place.
Sure.
Right. Just a different version of track.
Yep.
So when I go through all of the things that I have been out there for, and I don't know if you guys have ever been in the swamp,
Oh, I have.
swamp flat, and heard mud fart. You ever heard of mud fart?
Yep.
You've heard of mud fart.
Oh, I
You've
have.
heard of mud fart. When you get that,
Yep.
because a gas pocket was created under the mud, and it finally got big enough to breach like a cyst and rupture, and you get that nice, lovely decomp of vegetation, pluff mud, sulfur smell.
Like a squirter clam.
Exactly. And that's that thing. You take some folks out, and they will not recognize that noise. They will wonder what the hell that was.
Yeah.
Right? Now, to be around for that, to be around for hogs and heat, to be around for bobcats, to be around for rock slides, to be around for, you do tree service stuff. And you know when a tree gives way.
I'm very familiar with that sound.
Exactly. When a tree starts to give way, even over the sound of that saw, you get the pop, pop, pop. And then the limbs start to crash into other limbs. And if there are any vines there, they start to snatch out of the other trees and through the other vegetation.
It's a very noisy thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that happen. Exactly.
It's not just a thud.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that happen, whether it's a healthy tree or it's a tree that's eaten up with blight and parasites. There is a lot of noise associated between when that tree starts to give way and when that tree makes impact.
Even if it's just a stem.
Exactly.
If you've limbed a tree out
Yes.
and you're just dropping a stem, even when it hits the ground, there's more than a thud. It'll bounce.
Right. Exactly.
I've heard a rotten tree though. I've seen a rotten tree fall over and
I have.
no bounce.
Yes, I've seen that before too.
And so no bounce and a literal dull thud.
But
I've pushed a bunch of them over, and I'll tell you where, in Florida, while we were sitting there trying to get flying squirrels out of a tree. Which
Yeah. Used to be a great pet. That was kind of a status symbol to have a flying squirrel for a pet.
so when you push that tree over, they're usually in a rotten tree that you can get wiggling, but when you push that tree over, if it's dead and it's got water in it, when it hits,
just thump. Yeah.
it's just a thump. That's
So
it.
before the thump, here's a question, because I'm a question kind of guy, because I don't want to put words in your mouth. Before that tree hits the ground, before that first thump, is there any other noise? Is there any other creak, pop? Is there any other break noise? Is there any other limb noise? Is there any other vine noise? Is there anything other than just boom, and that was it?
I've seen it both ways.
Okay?
I've seen it both ways.
Okay.
No noise. Or if something was that night though, it was like somebody dropped
Something real dead.
something real heavy.
A big rock.
Yeah.
Like a big rock.
Flat rock.
Yep.
Okay.
So it sounds like wood to me. I've been I'm a contractor. I've been in the carpentry business for forever and a day. It sounded like wood hitting.
Yeah. So in that thing, if we talk about probability versus anomaly, right? An anomaly is when you say, hey, here's my arc of normal. This is either a spike or a valley compared to my arc of normal. Agreed?
Mm-hmm.
So, out there, without having someone else, a bunch of kids like yourself, going after flying squirrels, what are the chances that we just showed up in the woods and we went into Bankhead, what, almost 2 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Year ago? Year and a half? Year and a half.
Yeah.
Right. One time, we went into Bankhead, and that without having a bunch of kids out there to cause that event that you have experienced one time in your life, where a tree comes over without making any cracking or popping noises, and it falls, and it hits the ground, and it doesn't bounce. It just makes a loud, pliable, slapping thud noise, which to me, hearing myself hit the ground at 200 and plus pounds, that at 80 yards, it overshadowed my noise at 10 feet. It overshadowed that by 10, 20 times.
And I'll say this too, if we're saying that there was no prior noise to hearing a thud, but I don't know if there wasn't a noise before then, because we all stay focused on the main sound that hits the ground. You don't pay attention to, you pay attention to boom.
Okay. So here's to that point.
Just throwing that out there.
Yes. So in that saying and agreeing to your point, we've established a few things, and I throw this stuff out there for argument because that's what this show is really all about. All right. What was the temperature?
Cold.
Cold.
Super cold.
Not just cold, teen cold in the south, and we were near running water.
100 yards from running water.
100 yards from running water. Right. So,
which I'm gonna say, I was pissed about because I wanted to be down.
You wanted to be closer.
Yeah.
We were a little further away because we didn't want the creek to rise. Right. So, in that type of climate, with that type of temperature, and to your point, what you said, in cold temperatures, was there any wind?
There was no wind that night.
There was no wind the time we were there.
We were in a hole.
We were in a hole. We were in a hole. We were in a what? We were in a holler.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was no, and it was actually colder in the hole than it would have been up top.
Yeah.
Because
unless the wind would have been from the due north or the due south,
we were in one big hole.
We would not have seen any wind.
No.
So there was no wind.
No.
And on a cold, clear, moist, sound travels forever. I can tell you in Maryland that my closest neighbor is, well, my second closest neighbor is the one I hear outside. They are almost a third of a mile away. And on a cold, clear, crisp night, I can hear them talking in normal voice. I can't tell what they're saying.
Or listen to a car door close.
Yes. I can't hear what they're saying, but I can hear them.
Correct.
So I'm going to ask, because I don't tell, you can answer the question however you want to. I have my answer in my head before I ask the question. What are the chances of a tree, old, within 80 yards, at least 10 to 20 times my weight, right? Somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 pounds. I have judged that at least 800 pounds. I've done that to be polite as far as what hit the ground. But if you're talking about a tree at that range, I would say that noise was 10 to 20 times louder than I was hitting the ground at 10 to 15 feet away. Would you agree with that?
I would. I will sit
I'd
there.
say more weight.
Huh?
I would say more weight.
I would say more weight too. And I'll say this too. You know, it's wild because unless you spend a lot of time in the woods, we all have to understand that shit's happening out there all the time. Whether, you know, whether we're there for it or not, it's the whole story. You know, if a tree falls, before it, does it make a noise? You know, or you know, if a guy rides his dirt bike in the middle of the forest and his wife doesn't know about it, is he wrong?
Exactly. Right. So here's the question. I go back to the base question. Right. With that noise, with the way sound carries, with no wind, in that cold of a night, and that crisp of weather, what are the chances of a tree standing upright, moving over and starting to fall without making a creaking or popping noise, without hitting a vine attached to itself and maybe another tree, because we should have heard it under those conditions?
We were in old growth.
We were.
There's no vines.
There were.
There were in spots, yeah.
And there are no limbs in between this tree and when it hits the ground.
Right.
Because the only thing that we heard was the impact of whatever hit the ground. That's all I heard.
Yeah, that's all I heard. I don't know if I heard any creaking or cracking before, but because I was focused on the thud.
And it was loud enough to be disturbing.
Oh, you knew something happened. Oh yeah, for sure.
It disturbed all of us.
It had everybody's undivided attention instantly.
And nobody said anything when everybody knew what I meant when I said, well, you might want to mount up.
Yeah.
Nobody said anything. Everybody checked weapons. Everybody checked on safety. And Nate, God bless him, because, he's the one guy there that is not the 1, 2, 3, boop, boop, and he had a new weapon with him, and he had new gear with him. Everybody else, 10 seconds.
I was the first one in it. I'll tell you right now. When I sat there and said,
Yeah.
I was the first one that had my M4.
Exactly. And as Nate's getting ready, because Nate wants to go. Nate has gone through life wading through things because he's big and he doesn't experience pain the same way as other people do. And, yep, I'm going in, right? And he was going.
Yep.
And Joe moved up from me, behind me, on my right side a little bit, and he said, Dad, my back's toast.
Yeah, he was messed up.
I can't do this. And Adam, who is basically at my 1 o'clock.
The
Adam,
cat.
Yeah. The spider monkey of the spider
cat.
monkeys. Yeah. Spider
You
monkeys.
messed with him.
Yeah. Spider monkeys fear Adam. And Adam looked at me and he said, I ain't going. And I looked down because you, Ivan, were between me and Adam. And you turned around, you looked over your left shoulder and kind of up at me because you were squatted down beside the fire. And you said, And Nate is still going to work. Now me, because I was in there for a particular reason, I've got my sidearm, I've got my 4.58 on an AR platform. I checked the chamber, I checked safe, I checked the light. And I lowered that weapon across my chest. And I looked at Nate and I said, hey brother, I don't think this is a good idea. Nate looked over his left shoulder and went back to work. I said, hey, brother, 2 people don't make a circle.
Nope.
And Nate looked over his left shoulder and he went back to work. And at this point,
Somebody's got to Roger that guy up.
So at this point, I kind of look at him and I say, hey, brother, if you go out there, I'm going with you. 2 people don't make a circle. If something gets in between us and it's dark, it's going to get bad.
And then you're going to make me come out there, and then you're going to make Adam come out there.
Yeah, I said,
It's a bad idea because we didn't go out there together.
exactly. So, and I kind of looked at, I think I said this to him, I said, I'm not that smart, but I don't think this is a good idea. And you could just kind of see him because he kind of stood up a little bit, where I remember. And once he stood up, he kind of went, ugh. And all the energy just kind of fell out of him.
Let me tell you that. I'm going to tell you right now, Nate's best day is when he can bottle feed a little Bigfoot.
That'd be a good
That's
day.
going to be his best day.
We can all retire.
So anyway, let me speak to the whole mounting up.
Okay.
You never split the team.
No. Now, I would have been comfortable maybe with 2 in the camp
Negative.
and 3 moving away within sight.
Negative.
I might have been okay with that. But Joe was there. He was hurt.
We were 5.
Joe was there. He was hurt. I wasn't going to leave him there by himself. There was no way that I was stepping away with 2.
No, so me and Adam had just a recent, and I won't bring up how it happened or why it happened.
Yeah.
But me and Adam had a thing where a buddy of
I
ours.
can neither confirm nor deny that
Right.
anything illegal has happened or not happened, and I have no part or party in any of the occurrences that are about to be discussed. This is a complete and total legal disclaimer that Adam and Ivan are their own human beings and responsible for their own actions. Just saying.
Hey, so, hey, when Adam and I met, you know, we're at my house, you see that little patch of concrete in the back, just this little small thing.
Yeah.
And so Adam, he's the 140-pound former Marine, and he says, "You near gonna roll, old man." And I'm like, "Not tonight, we're not." And it happened a couple of more times, and so I finally sat there and said, "All right, bro, let's roll." And we're in the grass. How do we make it up onto the concrete to where I wake up the next day and my elbows are raw? I turned him into a tattooed skeleton where his whole entire spinal cord had every bit of piece of skin missing. And I'm like, it's not a good idea, my friend. However, what I want to say, Adam and I got into a place where a friend of ours called, because this is relevant to our team, a friend of ours called and said, "Hey, we're going to be here because we've got all this, you know, whatever happening." So Adam calls me and he goes, "Yo, did you get a phone call?" I'm like, "Yeah, I got a phone call." I said, I think I'm gonna sit this one out. And he says, "Well, you know, so-and-so just called me and he's gonna be down there. And now that he's down there, I'm gonna have to go down there." I said, "Well, now you're actually going down there. I gotta go down there now." So it's almost like when Nate was gonna go off into the woods and you and Jack, you said, "Well, now I'm gonna have to go." Yeah. And so further and further and further. And it wasn't a fear factor thing when I sat there and said, and when Adam said, "I'm not in it." It was a natural thing because, you know, Jack is Joe's dad. He comes down from his hometown and introduced us to Nate. And Joe, Adam and I have been hanging for a while. And so we have this little, you know, stuff's going bad and we turn into a triangle. You know, and that's exactly what happened in the woods. I don't know where or whatever it takes to get there. Did I hear something that, you know, was something nutty going on? Yes. I'm not saying that it doesn't. The woods are a wonderful, wild, friggin' place to be. And who knows if someone's gonna get clipped by a bear or
A Bigfoot?
a Bigfoot or ride a hog or ride a Bigfoot.
Yeah.
And
There is that.
you know, hey.
I'll tell you my big.
More to that. Big
I'll tell you my
Or
big.
Bigfoot riding me, whatever, you know. Hey, hopefully I got the fortitude to sit there and piggyback a Bigfoot.
Yeah.
I'll tell you my Bigfoot joke in just a few minutes. This concludes part 1 on our trip to Bankhead. We hope that you've enjoyed the show and the perspectives of those who are not inclined to believe in this subject. As always, be careful. If you decide to step off the pavement, if you decide to step off the trail and get back into places where people normally don't go, you need to be mentally, physically, and emotionally prepared for what you may encounter. Take care. God bless. We love you. And until next time, have a good evening.